My name is Jacob Ayon, and this is my story from bad to good. I've always grown up in a Christian church. It was always instilled in me to have Christian values. Living in a home with my father and my grandparents, I was raised to follow Christ. I was involved in private schools, Christian schools, through my early teenage years, getting to my young adulthood. My grandparents, who were both in ministry, passed away. When they passed away, I lost my relationship with God. I didn't have a home church, and every other church that I had visited just didn't make me feel completely welcomed, and I drifted away from the church. I was at a point where I figured I could do it myself. I started spending a lot of time partying, chasing, the next best thing. What's the most fun? What's gonna fulfill me in that moment? And I really was living a life where I was lusting for objects and women, and really living a life that wasn't honoring God. So finding Venture for the very first time was a very interesting story. I had been coaching golf at a youth development organization, and I actually met Ava and Chloe for the first time as their coach. I overheard them talking about church, so I got curious, and when Pastor Matt came to pick them up that afternoon, I just asked a question about church, and he invited me over to Venture. So that really started my opportunity to come back to Christ. I visited Venture Church in 2019 when it was still at Alvarez High School, and I remember walking in, not seeing Matt anywhere, thinking, well, maybe he's not here today. And sure enough, he's walking on stage, and that was the coolest moment to see that he was the pastor of this church. I visited maybe a couple more times after that. I think in total it was 3 times I had visited Venture, and I had again continued with my worldly path, and I drew away from God. In August of 2023, I had found this need to come back to church, and partially was because of a car accident that I had been involved in. Earlier that year in January, I was involved in an accident on the Grapevine heading towards Los Angeles, where I crashed into a center divider. My car spun across all lanes. I was unconscious for about a minute in total. And when I woke up, When I woke up, I had 2 individuals in front of me. I just came out of an all-black unconsciousness. These 2 individuals there was a bright aura around them, and I can't fully explain it other than guardian angels. God was with me. They told me what to do in that moment was wake up and get out of the vehicle. I had somebody with me. I immediately came to from this all black unconsciousness after seeing these 2 individuals in front of me. I exited the car. I pulled out my friend. I turned to thank the individuals. I couldn't find them anymore. There was a highway patrol officer who had witnessed the entire accident. and this person, he told me that I was very lucky to be alive still. I knew in that moment it wasn't luck, it was God. Sadly enough, that still didn't bring me back to church right away. It took months, still another 6 months, for me to fully have the courage to step back into church. I knew I needed to go. It was God calling me back. So I went to Alvarez High School to find Venture Church, and it was no longer there. So I was sad in that moment, I decided to drive home and take a different route than normal, a little more of a scenic route, so to speak, just so I can sit with my thoughts while I was driving home. And it's amazing how God works, because I passed right by Church Street and I seen the Venture signs. That same morning that God was telling me to come back to church, I thought I couldn't find it anymore, and he led me right back to it. I circled the street. I was still in a phase of unsureness, and I wasn't really confident that this was the Venture that I had remembered. So I was reluctant to walk in again, but something was pulling me there, and it was God. He was pulling me into the doors. As soon as I walked in, I felt home. And since that day, I haven't turned back. The next part of my journey begins now finding Venture Church here on Church Street as my home. Upon walking into the doors the first time, I sat down and I heard the sermon, and it was really one that was meant for me, and it hit me very, very deeply. I walked outside after service, and I saw Pastor Matt there, just as usual, greeting everybody, and he approached me immediately and hugged me, and he began to pray for me. And it was in that moment where everything that had been leading up to just really came out for the first time. And I started feeling loved, but I still pushed away. After he prayed for me, I was in tears, and I recall Matt telling me it's okay, but I still apologized for crying, and I walked away. I felt loved in that moment, and I didn't know what to do. After experiencing God's love for the first time, I realized how hard my heart was, and I realized that I needed to be a more loving person. I had held on to a grudge for about 10 years. A past best friend of mine had betrayed me in a way that I wouldn't have imagined possible. And I held on to that anger for so long. It came to a point where once I felt like I was forgiving, I was being put to a test. God put this person in my path again, and in a way to say, prove that you have forgiven him. And when I seen him, my initial reaction prior would have been a dirty look and some negative words exchanged. But in that moment, I knew that I didn't have any anger. I didn't have any hatred towards this person. And I knew within myself that I had forgiven. I extended my arm out and I shook his hand, asked him how he was doing, how his family was doing. And the look of surprise and shock of how kind I was being to him in that moment was, it was very powerful. I learned that he was also dealing with a similar type of hurt regarding that situation. He and I were best friends for years growing up, and because of that, we had lost our friendship entirely, and it had impacted him more than I had realized as well. I learned at that point that all the bitterness and anger that I had held on to really hardened me up in all aspects of my life. I hated showing emotion, and now I can't even control it. It comes out in an amazing way, and being more loving is something that I've always been focusing on and trying to improve in my life at all times. Current Jacob, current me, is someone who's always seeking to get closer to God and strengthen my relationship with Him. I've learned to be more forgiving, more of a loving person, and that's something that I'm always working on. There are times where I might slip, I might fall, and whenever those intrusive thoughts from the past do arise, I do what we learned in Bibles and Bros, and I send them to the cross. So it's really an amazing experience for me to be a part of Venture Church and to really strengthen my relationship with God and begin to feel like ministry is eventually going to be in the future for me. I now serve on our security team here. I've recently joined Venture Students. So little by little, I'm getting more involved with the church, getting closer to God, and I'm always finding ways to plant seeds within my friends, family, and in my community. While we do struggle and there are times where I feel like I'm a mess, I know that I'm God's mess, and He can turn mess into a masterpiece. Because I'm forgiven, I'm free to forgive.
The enemy may take some things, but he can't take my worship, can't take my worship. Oh, the enemy may take some things,